Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the RSIS-WSPC virtual book launch of Faith, Identity, Cohesion, Building a Better Future. I am Eugenia and I have the pleasure to be your MC today. This book, edited by Dr. Jolene Gerard and Ms. Amanda Juan, puts together the speeches, conversations, and discussions from the highly successful International Conference on Cohesive Societies, held from the 19th to 21st June 2019. The panelists you will be hearing from today will be discussing this book and hopefully elicit further discourse and thought from our audience and the book's readers. I would now like to invite Dr. Jolene Gerard, Assistant Professor in the Homeland Security Program at the Rabdan Academy in the United Arab Emirates, and Adjunct Senior Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, to deliver the editor's summary. Dr. Gerard, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. A very good morning here from Abu Dhabi, and certainly a good afternoon and a warm welcome to everyone from Singapore and around the world joining from the comforts of your offices or homes for the virtual launch of the book, Faith, Identity, Cohesion, Building a Better Future. So very good afternoon to Ambassador Ong Keng Yong, Executive Deputy Chair, RSIS, Dr. Paul Hedges, Associate Professor, Interreligious Studies, RSIS, and Professor Vinita Sinha, Head of the Department of Sociology and Head of the South Asian Studies Program, NUS Singapore. Today, Singapore commemorates Racial Harmony Day. 21st July has been designated as an official reminder of the race riots in 1964. The communal riots of 1964 refer to two separate series of race riots that occurred in Singapore when it was still part of the Federation of Malaysia. Almost 6 decades on, both the race riots of 1964 and the Maria Hertog riots in 1950 are at the heart of the narratives and the discourse of cohesion, unity, and harmony in Singapore. We thought it would be timely to release the book today. The book is an outcome of the International Conference on Cohesive Societies that was held in Singapore in June 2019 to discuss the strengthening of cohesive societies and interfaith harmony. First mooted by President Halima Yaakob the year before, in May 2018, the conference brought together 1,100 international thought leaders across academia, government, religious groups, and civil societies from 40 countries. The ICCS was organized by RSIS with the support of the Singapore's Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth. This book, Faith, Identity, Cohesion, Building a Better Future, is a compendium of insights and perspectives. It represents a coming together of minds and ideas in the search for a common ground through a framework of action against the very sobering backdrop of a rapidly changing global environment. It is a call to action, to use what has been seen to be divisive as a source of strength. My co-editor Amanda Juan and I hope that the essence of the deliberations and reflections from thought leaders across academia, governments, religions, civil society, and youth have been condensed adequately in this volume. The diversity of voices and sharing has certainly enriched the discourse tremendously. This book is divided into 4 primary sections: faith, identity, cohesion, and youth. This compendium thereby seeks to bring out the richness of this exchange for an inclusive and cohesive society that was conducted by the ICCS participants. In the section of faith, the contributors highlight the importance of a common and shared humanity, and that diversity is a naturally occurring phenomenon. Contributors include Ms. Karen Armstrong, who referred to the golden rule essential to human relationships for the creation of a cohesive society and calls for a profound acknowledgement of the transcendence of the individual self. The section has also contributions from religious scholars, including Cardinal Miguel, who provides the perspective from the Vatican and recounts the ongoing efforts of the Church to enhance social harmony and society through a call for human fraternity. Dr. Naziruddin Nasir, the Mufti of Singapore, extends this discussion further by highlighting insights from Islam and religious ethics. The Venerable Gohe further discusses the role that faith plays in world peace through a search for common ground, universal values, and cooperation amongst different faith communities. In the section of identity, the contributors acknowledge that we're all different, yet we share the same desire and aspiration, safety, and a sense of community and belonging. The notion of identity is not monolithic, and a complex feature of the social cohesion is about rendering a sense of belonging that is joined and melded with identity. The contributors here talk about the different aspects of identity politics and the ways to prevent and mitigate potential issues and conflicts. Professor Catherine Marshall, for example, underscores the importance of purposeful leadership and raises specific challenges for inclusive societies. Lord Alderdice relates his own experience and learning points in managing the conflict in Northern Ireland. Dr. Azhar Karam looks at the engagement of religious actors in developmental work on the international level, cautioning against blind engagement and affirming the need to deal with both interreligious and intra-religious sensibilities. Dr. Sashi Jayakumar highlights the complex and evolving role of social media and public discourse, while social resilience in diverse societies remain tenuous. In the section of cohesion, the contributors here present their differing experiences and expertise at addressing the issues of societal cohesion. The necessary change and initiatives must come from all sectors and levels. It is not enough for efforts to come only from governments or specific communities. It is clear that a whole of society effort is needed. Contributors here underscore the dominant challenges faced in fostering social cohesion and providing country case studies, including country case studies from Dr. Ali Al-Nuaimi from the United Arab Emirates, Dr. Anna Halifoff, who draws on lessons from her own work on interfaith communities and the points of challenges that are faced in intra-civilizational clashes. Dr. Kumar Ramakrishna expands this further, noting the theme of global peace-building efforts vis-a-vis religious extremism and terrorism. Dr. Muhammad Ali directs attention to community initiatives, and likewise, Senior Pastor Tan Xiao Hao shares his perspective on social cohesion and highlights key building blocks of inspiring social cohesion among the youth. The section on the youth highlights the role of youth as part of broader global efforts to build cohesive communities should not be dismissed or underestimated just because they are youth. The youth discussions have led to thought-provoking ideas and has affirmed solidarity in the positive steps that need to be taken in order to bring about change. This section of the book captures the key topics that were discussed at the Youth Leaders Forum. Prime Minister Lee had once noted that Singapore is a rare and precious example of a multiracial, multilingual, and multi-religious society where people live harmoniously together. More recently, Education Minister Ong Ye Kung noted that conversations on race and religion should continue to evolve, and rightly so. Collectively, Singaporeans recognize the salience in discussions of race relations through the years. Stories of Singapore's exceptionalism with regards to race relations has been hailed as a hallmark, especially in view of diversity of races and the successes throughout the years. But identity continues to be a central facet, and today its discussions too will have to evolve with the times. Contemporary challenges and issues of racial or religious identity will need to be continuously discussed in an evolving fashion. Broadly, as highlighted in the book, studies around the world have uncovered troubling trends. For example, hostilities involving religion have increased in recent years. Violence caused by religious intolerance, exclusivism, and extremism has been on the rise. Conversations on race, faith, identity is often securitized due to its very polarizing nature. The exclusivist tone of identity politics and its divisive nature continues to present a challenge globally. On a positive note, in the process of forging a Singapore identity, the new generations of Singaporeans have shown openness to the discourse and to questions of where, as a country, we can look towards as a future. As with societies all over the world, we too have to reflect as Singaporeans, what do we believe in? Singapore in a 2014 Pew survey was listed as the world's most religiously diverse country. In a multi-religious country such as ours, what's the role of faith to play in pluralistic societies? What does the role where atheists come in? And perhaps how do we manage these differences in identities? Addressing these issues in an age of diversity means a question of how we can enhance the building of bridges. These are very real and pointed questions that face diverse societies around the world. The challenge will lie in finding a unique blend and balance that is our own, one that is perhaps domestically here, Singapore style. The present volatile, uncertain, and complex era underscores the need for visionary, unifying ideas. For example, the diverse religious leaders of Singapore have come together regularly to forge common ground. They have demonstrated brotherhood, friendship, and solidarity amid Singapore's multiracial city-state. So even as a concert of global voices raise the idea of addressing inequality and injustice has grown louder with a desire to achieve very real change. With platitudes aside and no side steps, as a community, we must walk steadfastly together to strengthen cohesion, harmony, and unity. Honoring not only the legacy of our forefathers, but the next generation will need to work towards not just acceptance of others, but understanding of each other. Tolerance is only the first step. The goal is to embrace diversity of racial and religious identities that must lead to social cohesion. In embracing diversity, we will discover the strength that will help build a better future. As shared humanity continues to be confounded by numerous challenges, such as this current pandemic, the insights shared in this book attempt to unpack and explore some of these critical notions of faith, identity, and cohesion, and what they mean for multifaceted societies today, especially as part of a larger contemporary world. The recognition of our shared humanity is the first step to finding common space and building a better future. It is our hope that this book provides you with the inspiration and knowledge to reach out to others and team up with like-minded fellow academics or travelers in this journey of striving to find cohesion and coexistence in our diverse world. So no matter what happens, while we cannot wish away diversity, it remains for us to make diversity here work for the benefit of our shared humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. We will now hear expert views from our commentators. First, may I invite Dr. Paul Hedges, Associate Professor in the Studies in Interreligious Relations in Plural Societies program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, to deliver his points. Dr. Hedges, please.
Thank you, Eugenia, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to say something about the process and ideas behind the ICCS conference itself to begin, and let this sort of lead into something about the book and the way the book looks the way it does. Now, as Jolene has mentioned, the idea of the ICCS conference was first mooted in early 2018 by President sort of Halima, and then under the guidance of the MCCY and RSIS, it took shape. Now, to some extent, the planning for this conference was done actually within quite a tight timetable from 2018 into June 2019. And certainly it began in earnest quite late in 2018. And at the beginning of November of that year, I went with a team from the MCCY to the World Parliament of Religions, which has been held in Toronto, where we started to scout around for some people who might be potential speakers for us, and actually we found some of our speakers there. And it was just later on in that month that I recall Benny Oon from RSIS coming and approaching me during one of our executive programs we were running and asking me if I would like to sort of take a lead role in conceptualizing the ICCS program. Now, as there was a strong focus on religious harmony in the initial plans, and while the whole of RSIS was involved in pulling it together, this meant that some of the ideal work naturally came to the SRP program, the Studies in the Interreligious Relations in Plural Societies program. And within that SRP program, it basically fell into my lap to become, if you like, the key ideas person for thinking through this. So taking initial ideas from the MCCY and in consultation with colleagues, I wrote a first draft of a concept paper for the conference. And this included some central themes, some key speakers we might like to invite, and also providing some direction on what the conference might look like. And of course, as an initial concept paper, the ideas there changed over time. For one thing, the focus was no longer simply on religion, but we broadened it as one factor in wider discussions around sort of social cohesion. But that remained, if you like, a key aspect of it. And of course, there was negotiation over who may and may not be suitable speakers for the conference. But eventually, the three themes of the conference were agreed: faith, identity, and cohesion, which of course give us the title for this book. Now, these terms are themselves, if you like, sort of matters of debate. In my initial concept paper, I went under headings of what we believe, who we are, and how we belong. And we discussed various other terms that might be used, such as ideology, identity, and inclusion, before we fixed upon these three terms which made up the title as we have it here, of faith, identity, and cohesion. I've had this book about 3 hours now, as it's just come out the first print run. It's all wrapped in plastic. It's not been through quarantine yet. Now, a few other sort of key aspects of the ICS sort of planning perhaps also sort of need to be mentioned. One of these, and Jolene has mentioned this already, is the youth aspect. And in the plans I drew up, this was one of the absolutely sort of key aspects to it. I said there was no point in having a conference like this if we weren't involved in, if you like, sort of the young people as a key aspect in it. And while the ICCS ran across 3 days, the 2 days beforehand were the Youth Leaders Programme, their platform, and all of the members of that were present at the whole event. And of course, they also have a place in this book. And also as part of this, I understand many of the networks that were built then are still sort of continuing. Again, that was absolutely essential. This shouldn't just be a one-off thing, but should build onwards and outwards from what it did. The second key point I wanted to mention was to have a wide, inclusive and global range of speakers. My aim was to get a broad global balance, so we didn't simply have white male Christian men speaking, but to aim for gender equality in our panels, to represent as wide a range of religious viewpoints as possible, and to get speakers from many different parts of the globe. Given our rather late date for starting, we couldn't always get everyone we wanted, but I think the depth and breadth of the lineup was quite impressive. And on the first full day, to have King Abdullah of Jordan and sort of Karen Armstrong, I think speaks to some of the success we had in finding really first-rate speakers. But having said that, there were still some speakers who managed to get away from us, but hopefully when ICCS2 comes along, they will be able to sort of catch a few of those fish and bring them in for that. Now, as I spent a bit of time talking about the ideas for the conference organisation, how this came together. And of course, the book is a direct outcome of all of that. And as I've mentioned, those 3 themes of faith, identity and cohesion lead into the 3 sort of sections of this. And of course, within those 3 sections, some of the sub-themes of the conference are also found here. So ideas about sort of how education fits into promoting social cohesion are covered. There are the questions of peace building, psychology, the route ways into and out of radicalization and extremism are discussed. And linking back to what I said about diversity, we have chapters from the standpoints of Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, amongst other religions, as well as secular voices and many diverse perspectives. Also, of course, the paper doesn't just reflect the plenary lectures and the main sort of presentations, because we had a whole range of breakout sessions, which again was part of the planning of this, to have a wider sort of set of accessible sort of ideas that would sort of speak to people in their sort of particular situations. So again, this book benefits from the huge sort of breadth of these sort of smaller sort of sessions that we had built in to the ICCS. Now, I decided not to pick out any individual chapters for comment. There's simply so much in here and an awful lot that would be sort of looked at, but there's a truly huge range of sort of quality exhibited in these writers from sort of both global and inclusive contexts. But of course, having the book now here, it isn't an end point. Social cohesion is never something that is ever simply attained. It's always a goal that has to be striven towards. Every generation will have to fight this battle. And as such, while the first ICCS has ended, and this text, the book, marks to some extent the end of a work cycle for RSIS, the need for continuing work to build cohesive society remains. And of course, perhaps in our minds at the moment is how COVID-19 will play into this. Will it help to bind societies more closely together? Will it sort of show up sort of fractures and create sort of later fractures? It's certainly too early to say, and surely we'll see sort of quite different dynamics in different places. All told, therefore, there is certainly still work to be done, but this book can be something of a stepping stone towards that future. There are examples of good practice. It discusses key problems that will arise. There are case studies from particular regions and contexts, as well as theories to help us think about the issues and clarify what needs to be done. So I sincerely hope that this resource will be of benefit as we all seek to embrace our common humanity, look at our shared and overlapping values, and build greater cohesion in our communities at the local, regional, national, and international levels. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hedges. Next, we have Professor Vinita Sinha, Head of Department of Sociology at the National University of Singapore. Professor Sinha, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe in these very trying times. I'm delighted to be at this online book launch, the first one for many of us, I'm guessing, and it is certainly a novel experience. So warm welcome to everyone, especially those that I can't see. I'm assuming they are there listening to us. I also want to thank the organizers for this event, and especially Ambassador Ong, Dr. Paul Hedges, and Ms. Amanda Kwan for inviting me to be a part of this event. Let me first congratulate the editors, Dr. Jolene Gerard and Ms. Amanda Kwan, on the publication of this book, as well as all the authors who have contributed to the book and the participants of the ICCS conference in June 29, on which this publication is based. It's always gratifying when conference projects materialize into concrete outcomes like this. I do have my own copy of the book as well. I don't know if you can see it, but thank you, Amanda, for getting that to me. Faith, Identity, Cohesion, Building a Better Future is indeed an important and timely book. It seeks to be both interventionist and aspirational in imagining and then trying to actualize multicultural, multi-religious, diverse societies which are grounded in the principles of mutual respect, trust, empathy, and understanding of all cultures and communities. I was also very struck, and it is very commendable, that the project itself highlights the importance of building creative partnerships with different constituencies which are all equally invested in their commitment. And this includes faith communities, faith-based organizations, policymakers, government leaders, civil society groups, NGOs, religious scholars, as well as academics. And I must say, most importantly, young people whose visionary and progressive leadership on these issues will realize this project of building and sustaining cohesive communities in the future. So I think both the conference and the book that has materialized should really be congratulated for this effort. As a sociologist and anthropologist of religion, I am personally very happy to participate in this conversation on a very important subject. As a researcher and educator, I see tremendous value in the need for continuing dialogue, debates, and disagreements in the classroom, in workshops, in conferences and symposia, where we collectively, critically engage different partners in possibly awkward and uncomfortable discussions to move towards the goal of enhancing what I would call interreligious and intercultural competence and achieving interfaith literacy, which it is important to acknowledge are challenging to achieve in practice. Allow me to share one such collaborative project that I was recently a part of. I'm not going to summarize the book because both Jolene and Paul have done an excellent job of taking us through the conference and the book. But I want to use both the book and the conference as a stepping stone for talking about broader issues. So the project that I was involved in was initiated by an independent association called the International Panel on Social Progress. Some in the audience have perhaps heard about this initiative. In 2015, this organization, the International Panel on Social Progress, brought together more than 200 scholars from a wide range of disciplines and from many different parts of the world to assess and synthesize the state-of-the-art knowledge that bears on the idea of social progress across a range of economic, political, and cultural questions. I was part of a group of academics from different universities in the world, 9 of us actually, who were charged with interrogating the relationship between religion and social progress. And some of the questions we asked were questions like, was religion and faith relevant to global affairs and issues of social justice and environmental change, for example? Was religion necessarily hostile to social progress? Or could religion be a factor in social progress and social justice? And if so, how could it continue to be relevant? This particular project, it was a massive project. The goal of the project was to provide audiences and a larger public, including researchers, educators, policymakers, religious communities, and religious practitioners with the best expertise that social science can offer on specific topics. In the case of the group I was in, this was the topic of religion. I'm happy to say that the outcome of this particular research was published in a very large chapter of 40,000 words, jointly authored by 9 colleagues. And this chapter is called Religions and Social Progress, Critical Assessments and Creative Partnerships. This was published in an edited volume in 2018 by Cambridge University Press. So this has been one of my forays in being involved with the kind of critical engagement and collaboration that is needed to meaningfully contemplate not just the complex issues at hand in talking about religion and its entanglements with other societal domains, but really to think about what kinds of societies we want to live in going forward. The IPSU project that I was involved with offered the state-of-the-art research and data on religions globally. We know that about 80 to 85% of the world's population affirms some kind of religious affiliation and identification, a percentage that seems to be growing rather than declining. The impact of religion and its relevance to global affairs, social cohesion, and social justice is evident in a variety of fields. Excuse me, family, gender and sexuality, diversity and democracy, conflict and peace, everyday well-being, and care for the environment. This suggests to us the significance of religious beliefs and practices in everyday lives. The presence of religious commitments is to be expected and is often a significant factor in producing social changes. But this chapter that we wrote also produced what we called an action toolkit, which offered a set of guidelines, principles, assumptions, and methodologies which will be helpful in the larger conversation and efforts about achieving social progress. Allow me to selectively share some of the elements and lessons learned from this particular collaboration, which I think merit reiteration in the context of the present discussion. So I just have 5 points that I want to make in terms of lessons learned. I think the first point is that it is important to support freedom for religious and non-religious identification as a fundamental human choice and a fundamental human right. And I think it's important to reject the problematic and limited binary of rational, progressive secularism on the one hand, and irrational, reactive religion on the other hand, which has the effect of reinforcing precisely the reactionary reflex it sets out to condemn. It is equally critical to recognize the internal diversity of all religious traditions, thereby avoiding generalizations, stereotypes, and negative judgments that are alienating and unproductive. The second point is that one needs to be mindful of rhetorical and mere symbolic nod to interreligious understanding, sidestepping serious engagement with sensitive and controversial issues. In negotiating the terrain of multi-religious and multi-ethnic plural societies, the emphasis should be on seeking what I have called elsewhere in my writings, sameness and convergences and overlaps across religious traditions, but without anticipating consensus and without being anxious about obvious expected differences. One way to achieve this mindset is to emphasize and enact professional education to establish basic literacy, religious literacy as the standard for cultural competence. Third, it is imperative to engage with varied partners and stakeholders in debating and evaluating religion and faith-based policy initiatives. We should expand mutual knowledge and understanding and report on these findings to larger public audiences. And in order to do that, we need to make room for the specific contributions that various religious traditions may bring to pursuing social cohesion. And this includes religious stories and symbols, everyday ritual practices, as well as to recognize local leaders and organizational capacity. Four, I think it is critical to bring the expertise of social science to bear on critical analysis of religion and to highlight the limits and promise of partnerships with faith communities and faith-based organizations. And to recognize the continuing need for research and action that highlights the place of religion in society. Cultivating ongoing ties with religious scholars is key, as they can bring the necessary expertise to the table for debate and discussion. No single expert, secular or religious, should be expected to have all of the knowledge required, and certainly secular knowledge should not necessarily be seen to be superior in this context. Funders and reviewers of social science research should be encouraged and persuaded to recognize the value of supporting research on religion. And researchers need to be alert to opportunities to expand existing research programs in order to reiterate the role of religions in political, economic, and social domains, and of course to insist about their impact on societal and global affairs. And my fifth intervention is to support the efforts of religious leaders, groups, and movements which are working to produce greater understanding and harmony across religious traditions, to end discrimination and to engender greater well-being, equality, and opportunity for greater number of people. I think it's important to support these initiatives, which are also based at exposing and countering different kinds of abuse, both within religious communities and beyond. So I think establishing creative partnerships that include religious individuals, organizations, and communities as key players is really important in mobilizing different constituencies for action and in debates about the future. So finally, I just want to read the concluding paragraph from the IPSP chapter that I co-wrote and cited earlier. I quote, "Researchers and policymakers pursuing social progress will benefit from careful attention to the power of religious ideas to motivate, of religious practices to shape ways of life, of religious communities to mobilize and extend the reach of social change, and of religious leaders and symbols to legitimate calls to action. The continuing need for critical but appreciative assessment and the demonstrable benefits of creative partnerships has to be a crucial starting point, end of quote. I want to end my 10 minutes on this note. And again, thank you for the opportunity to engage this very interesting project and book. And I look forward to a fruitful conversation with everyone. Thank you very much.
Professor Sinha. May I now invite Ambassador Ong King Yong, Executive Deputy Chairman at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, to join in the discussion with the commentators, and Dr. Gerard as the moderator. Panelists, please.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hello,
everyone. Yes, hello. Perhaps as part of this general discussion, I will maybe first use the moderator's prerogative and maybe address the question to Ambassador Ong. As we think about Racial Harmony Day today, what would you think about what would be your opinion of the role of the average Singaporean? What can the average Singaporean do as part of furthering some of these discourses that was raised by Dr. Paul Hedges as well as Professor Sinha?
Well, first of all, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, I think the important point has been made by Dr. Sinha. It's important to bear in mind that every one of us have our own faith, our own no faith, and our own religious upbringing. And there will always be differences. And it is useful for us to have an open mind, listen to what other people say, and more importantly, in a very urbanized setting like Singapore, look at what other people are doing and perhaps ask questions. Oh, why are you doing it this way? We do it differently in my home, and appreciate the different backgrounds and consideration that bring about such kind of diverse practices or diverse thinking about faith or about religion. So some of my friends have their children in school, and they always ask, why do they have to talk about this Racial Harmony Day in Singapore? It's like a given. But seriously, even today, we have our National Library having to review books written about children interacting with one another, and then there are what they call certain preconceived notions about someone from another community, from a different ethnic background or different religious background. So that means that we really need to continue this process. It's an ongoing thing, as one of the previous panelists mentioned. Yeah, it's necessary for us to start this kind of awareness building right from an early age. So, yeah, I remember children start very early in the schools in Singapore on what is racial harmony, what it means for them coexisting with others. As we go up the educational ladder, sometimes we stop having to contemplate this thing about racial harmony. Maybe we should continue. Perhaps as they are in secondary school or in high school, we can develop more interesting program to activate them, rather than just say, oh, we do this in the junior schools. And as we grow up, we assume that you have got everything and we don't have to pursue or spend too much time on this in the high school. No, it's a learning process. And as Dr. Sinha mentioned, we have to constantly think about the creative partnership. In the book that we talk about, this book that we are launching today, towards the end of the book, we had a couple of pages reproducing some recordings of the discussions in picture form, in a artistic portrayal about what the young people think about the issues before them. And very often they refer to this concept of broadcasting. Yeah, we must tell people why we do this. Tell others, why are we doing things different from you? Yeah, and then to share the story that each one of us has in our own community. And I believe that this is something quite significant. These are young people aged 18 to 25, and they talk about constantly having the need to share the story and explain things. So Racial Harmony Day in Singapore should not just be on 21st of July each year, and more so in the primary and secondary school, but we should carry on in our high school, in our university, talk about it. As we go up the educational ladder, we become more sophisticated in expressing ourselves. So that's my response. I do not know, maybe Dr. Sinha and Paul have other comments. Thank you.
Dr. Hedges and Professor Sinha, following on from Ambassador Ong's comments, in terms of the role of social narratives, when you're talking about these narratives and cohesion, Dr. Hedges, you had raised the issue of narratives. How has these narratives shifted, and does it make a difference if the narratives are broadcast top-down, or should it be a bottom-up initiative?
Okay, thank you. That's a really good question there. Yeah, I mean, narratives are really important, and it's about the stories that we have as to who we are, how we fit into our societies, what we think other people are like, how we should sort of behave. All of this is the stories of our life, sort of what makes us who we are. And so, yes, I mean, overcoming sort of problems with sort of cohesion, built-in cohesion, is not about sort of giving people sort of facts or sort of simply ideas. You need something they can buy into, and this is normally just this narrative or a story within it. And Basinda sort of almost sort of just been saying, you know, these stories can be sort of done at different levels. So sort of primary school at one level, but as people sort of get older, get more sophisticated, we need more sophisticated sort of stories sort of for them. And this is partly like sort of the stereotypes that we have about other groups in society. Just because you've learned something, they don't go away. Those stereotypes sort of persist into society, they get sort of rebuilt over time. And so, yes, I mean, we need sort of stories that will help to overcome these kind of sort of latent sort of prejudices, which people may still have somewhere in their mind. It's not like a one-time often I said, well, you do this. Every generation we see these sort of things recurring. And perhaps sort of to mention also, it's not such an issue in Singapore, but something like sort of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has existed for thousands of years, sort of prejudice against Jews. It doesn't go away because at certain times we overcome it. I mean, particularly after the Holocaust, people were shocked and appalled, but we see it sort of resurgent again today. I mean, these sort of like the negative stories and narratives are out there, so we need positive stories and narratives to help overcome them. And again, this is the idea about sort of broadcasting from the young people. Yes, you know, if we don't say anything about it, just assume people know this, well, we discovered that people don't know this. There's this constant sort of need to retell these stories, create new stories, and to keep on sort of building sort of cohesion within our societies.
Thank you, Dr. Hedges. Professor Sinha, anything to add in terms of your work, in terms of when you talk about this idea of meaningful contemplation, sort of this, what you listed as interventionist and aspirational element of narratives moving forward?
Right. Thank you. Hi, Jolene. I mean, I agree with both the points that Ambassador Ong and Paul have made. I think narratives are very important, and I think where narratives come from, you know, is also important to pay attention to. But in addition to narratives, I think what's also important is to pay some importance to everyday experiences on the ground, right? I think those are very important, and you know, I think the experiences on the ground need to be given their due integrity, in their due authenticity, and they need to be acknowledged, right? I mean, here we are talking about social cohesion, which suggests to me and to us that there are gaps, right? That there are blind spots, that there are fault lines, that there are issues which need to be sorted out so that one can move towards social cohesion. So I think a large part of the narrative also needs to genuinely acknowledge the areas in which you know, cohesion is lacking, and to then contemplate, you know, what are the sources of that gap, and then try to plug that. I think that's really important.
Professor Vinita, would you be able to share a bit more on how your action toolkit that you had raised just now, how has this action toolkit been publicized? And
well, it's part of the chapter that we have written. As I said, this is included in the conclusion of the chapter. And the action toolkit is really tied to particular thematic events, right? And so we are looking at, you know, how specific kinds of policies can be constructed on particular issues, like, for example, how do you introduce the idea of cultural competence and religious literacy, right? What are the things that you can actually do? So, I mean, it kind of avoids too much of hand-holding, because a lot of these action toolkits really need to be contemplated within particular specific contexts. But, you know, we speak in terms of general principles, right? And the idea, for example, that, you know, we perhaps, I mean, we've been talking for a long time about mutual understanding, you know, empathy, etc. But sometimes these things remain very abstract, right? And, you know, at a very conceptual level, but so in order to make them concrete, in order to actually break them down into actionable components, right, we need to do particular kinds of things. So the action toolkit really specifies general principles about what needs to be done. And I see there is a question about translatability into languages. Yes, I totally agree, right? So, and I actually look at the issue of translation on multiple levels, right? So, you know, certainly from English to other languages, etc. But I think this issue of cultural and religious translation is equally important, which alludes to something that Ambassador Ong mentioned earlier about how do you generate this kind of understanding across religions and cultures by translating you know, significance and meanings of particular actions and thought processes for others to understand.
Thank you, Professor Vinita. I think one of the elements that we had also tried to highlight in the book was this commitment that the multi-religious scholars, multi-religious individuals came on board to put up in terms of, in the book, we had listed this commitment to a multi-religious Singapore. A question has also come in, looking at the question that was asked was, what is the age that dialogue about differences, what age should it start? Is there a particular age that it should start? I suppose this is a question across panelists. I know Ambassador Ong had raised that in school we had gone through it at different ages. Is there a particular age in which this discussion should start?
Shall I say something first?
Sure, absolutely.
So, I mean, I think that's an interesting question, but I would like to perhaps reframe the question slightly, right? So when we talk about age, we tend to individualize the problem, right? So we think it's particular individuals, you know, who are sort of don't have understanding or don't understand other cultures, etc., etc. You know, perhaps we should think of age in more collective terms, and we should talk about the age of societies, right? I mean, what kinds of societies do we live in where it is okay for 4-year-olds to bully each other, right, on ethnic grounds? I mean, where are kids picking up these things from, right? I mean, are they picking up from their home backgrounds? I mean, the research on this suggests very strongly that children do repeat what they hear in the home, and possibly what they're hearing from their teachers and other groups of you know, primary sort of actors in their lives. So I don't think, I think one should assume that we should pay attention to the nature of societies rather than the nature of individuals, right? So I hesitate to say it should be 2 years or 3 years or whatever, because the research on this has also shown that very young children can express quite alarming levels of prejudiced behavior, right? And so I do think it's important to pay attention to the structure of the societies in which we live, rather than sort of say, oh, it should start at age 4 or it should continue, you know. It's a lifelong journey, but we should strive, I think, to ensure that we are creating societies in which people of all ages know what it means to be respectful and empathetic towards others. Yeah.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Yeah, that's a wonderful response from Dr. Vinita. I was also thinking about your question, Jolene, and I remember some of my neighbors telling me that as I was growing up, it is not so much when a child should be taught about all these harmonious and cohesive kind of coexistence, but at home, yeah, some parents will mumble and grumble about, you know, certain activities pursued by other communities, or or religious festival. And if simple remarks like, "Oh, it's very noisy and is too much activities are being done, and we should not have all these on the street and what have you," that will create a I would say at a young age, an unconscious ingrained in the young children. So it is important, the family setting and how each of our individual parents approach the different diverse festivity across different racial and different religious community. Yeah. So it is not necessary to say, when you go to first grade, you have to start learning about this. Perhaps there can be a bit of formality first grade. You start to talk a bit more about this, but really is how family are bringing. And even today, I'm learning about how to appreciate what is happening in other faith and other ethnic groups. Yeah. And every day is a lifelong learning for me.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Hedges, anything to add? Should it be an age of society? Should it rest on the teachers or the family?
Yeah, well, I agree with everything that has been said so far. And I think sort of Vinita mentioned before, kind of this idea of like an interfaith literacy and sort of cultural, inter-ethnic sort of literacy. I mean, this has to be there, yes, amongst the children, amongst the teenagers, amongst the adults, amongst the parents, amongst the educators. So, it's not just you can start sort of one place, because if the structure has got a problem, as Vinita was saying, it's not going to change anything. You should just work on individual by individual. And so this goes back to our question about sort of the narratives, but yes, ingraining this all the way through society is important. Thank
you. So perhaps to round up some of the discussions that we've had so far, looking forward, I suppose this across to all the panelists, for Ambassador Ong, for example, looking forward, what do you think would be the role of think tanks in sort of playing the role of a bridge in some of these discussions? For Dr. Hedges, for example, what would be the role of the youth or academia in playing that role? And for Professor Sinha, looking towards the future, what will be the role of communities in sort of navigating this issue of narratives and everyday experiences as well? So for Ambassador Ong, how do you see the role of think tanks moving to the future as acting as a bridge for some of these very real and pointed discussions?
Well, I like what Dr. Sinha referred to as the religious literacy. Yeah. In our school, the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, we have Paul Hedges and a few of the other brilliant academics reminding us about this program of theirs, interreligious relations, yeah, in plural society. But it's not just in plural society, every society. So we have to raise the level of religious literacy. Yeah, this point made by Karen Armstrong is important about transcendence and all that. It is something that nobody thinks about on a daily basis, but hey, it has a lot of meaning, and I think it is important for us as a center of research, center of thinking, center of future thinking and future ways to start really look at some of these. The panelists talk about looking for consensus, looking for harmony. Yeah, but at the end of the day, the differences will always be there. It's not just how we can come to some consensual arrangement, but it has to be understood. I always say it is no good just to tolerate one another, because tolerance will break at one point, whereas understanding will never be broken down. So I think this is important. Going forward, we should continue to inject all these important sensitivities in our research work, in our writings in the think tank, and as we interact with think tanks from other parts of the world, other regions of the world, yeah, we should continue to talk about this. And the point about language is important, because sometimes when we talk about All these things in our very anglicized context, Paul, Vinita, we forget that a lot of people out there, they speak their own native languages, native dialects. And if we don't engage them or bring them into the conversation, whatever we say may not really have any impact on these guys. Of course, our professor in the school here always say, what matters is the leaders. Leadership matters. Yes, but leaders have to be shown that their flock, their people also have a certain opinion about certain things. And whether it is in the English language or any other languages or dialect, it must be fully appreciated and understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Hedges, maybe a couple of quick comments into the role of academia moving forward as part of these discussions.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this, a lot of sort of what is needed, if you like, is action. It's sort of to practice on the ground. But of course, the question is, how do we know what is good action, what is good practice? And I think that's partly the role of academics, that, you know, many of us, that we study these things, we sort of look at results that come out, we try to sort of balance and sort of theorize sort of what's been successful and what has not been successful. And so it's bringing, if you like, that sort of the theory with the practice together. And people sometimes talk about, if you like, sort of the scholar practitioner, somebody who sort of knows and sort of practices at the same time. So that, I think, is really where sort of scholarships and sort of come in with this. And of course, you mentioned just sort of before, of course, the youth side of this as well. And again, that's absolutely essential, because if a lot of this is sort of built into society, of course, what we do as academics is also we teach the next generation. And if we can sort of get the teaching sort of in there, we can get these ideas into sort of next generation, then, you know, hopefully we can make a better future out of this.
Thank you, Dr. Hedges. Professor Sinha.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so, you know, I'm an ethnographer and I work on the ground. I mean, I do research on religion, and one of the things I've been doing over the last 10 years is actually looking at instances of religious syncretism and religious hybridization on the ground, right? So in the course of this research, I have worked with Hindu communities, which is my mainstay, but I've also worked with Taoist communities and Chinese religious practitioners. And this I've done across Singapore and Malaysia, right? And I'm often very struck by how easily people on the ground in their everyday lives, right, are able to cross these boundaries, which seem to be so problematic for other people, you know. And so I talk to my informants and I say, oh, you know, there's all this religious tension, and they look at me oddly, right? Because they're like, where is this tension? Because I interview Chinese participants who take part in Thaipusam and fire walking. I you know, talk to Hindus who go to, you know, Taoist temples for various things, right? So, I mean, I think sometimes there's a tendency to think that people on the ground are the problem. People on the ground are not the problem. People on the ground have sorted it out, right? They know how to do this thing, right? And I think we will do well to pay attention to what they do, right? And I sometimes wonder whether, I mean, with all due respect to the, you know, existence of well, tensions, et cetera, I think we need to ask ourselves where this tension is coming from and who does it apply to, right? I mean, you know, the people that I talk to, and I'm talking about large communities across Malaysia and Singapore, Hindus and Taoists, who really work very well together, participate in each other's festivals and, you know, support each other, etc. Everyone knows, I think, in Singapore, all the examples of interfaith, you know, instances that are out there, right? So I think, you know, as a balance, I think it's important, of course, to highlight the areas in which we can work more in order to produce better understanding, etc. But I think it's as important to highlight the already existing harmony on the ground, right? And there are lots of examples of that. So, and I think this, Paul, this is where your point about narratives is also very important, right? Because, you know, there are consequences to how one constructs the narratives, right? So, you know, talking about religion and social cohesion might give the impression that there's no cohesion, which in the Singapore context is not the case at all, right? So I think one needs some specificity in terms of where exactly we see the gaps as being, and to kind of provide a balanced narrative that acknowledges the many instances of very spontaneous and organic kind of interactions that occur very easily across religious boundaries. So for the future, I would like to see a Singapore in which religious communities take ownership of other religions in their midst, right? So it's not about Hindus taking ownership of Hinduism and, or Muslims taking ownership of Islam. I would like to see Hindus being proud of Chinese religion in Singapore, right? And taking ownership of that, and I think that's what it means to be part of a larger collective, right? Where we are not segmenting ourselves and saying only Hindus should be interested in Hinduism, only Muslims should be interested in Islam, right? But to truly cross that boundary, I would like to see non-Hindus support Hindus in public domains. And I think the day that happens, right, then I think we don't have to have conferences like this anymore.
Thank you so much, Professor. So to round up the panel, so certainly thank you from the scholar practitioner, the academic, and the policymaker. Thank you so much for the discussion and the robust discussion. Certainly the International Conference on Cohesive Societies as a collective, while our discussions today highlighted the role of Singapore, the conference as a whole highlighted, like you raised earlier, like all the panelists raised earlier, very important discussions throughout and societal discussions. And this is reflected in the nature of the group of people that have gathered together to contribute their ideas to this discourse and the compendium wherein they've put in their insights across diverse societies and nationalities as well. And with that, let me conclude this part of it and pass the floor over to Eugenia. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. We now invite Ambassador Ong Keng Yong to deliver the closing remarks. Ambassador, please.
Thank you. I hope you can see me and hear me.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Well, as Eugenia said, my name is Ong Keng Yong, and I am here at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. This is a school in the Nanyang Technological University here in Singapore. We are focused on security issues across traditional security issues and non-traditional security issues. And this is one of the underlying reason why RSIS is involved in this organization of the ICCS, the International Conference on Cohesive Societies. First of all, let me thank Professor Vinita Sinha from the National University of Singapore and Professor Paul Hedges from the RSIS in the NTU campus here for your brilliant discourse this afternoon. And of course, Jolene Gerard, we lost her to Abu Dhabi, but she is still having one foot here because we have a clever device called adjunct senior fellow position. So we still can tap on her knowledge from time to time, as you see it today. She and Amanda Huang put together this wonderful book that we are launching today. I do not know how many brain cells have been killed by this effort, but definitely for many of us in the RSIS, we have more white hair, and one or two people have actually gotten bald because of this initiative that we have to undertake. I also want to thank the World Scientific Publishing for tolerating us, putting this book out into the wider audience out there. I hope that all of you would enjoy this book because it's quite a creative presentation. I would say a bit innovative, yeah. In not making this book like a typical report of an international conference or of an international conference. Now, in launching this book, we have a couple of important messages which we thought we should put across. As Jolene hinted to it just before me speaking, this book is not about Singapore. It is about one aspect of the quest for managing our diversity and our effort to be inclusive. Yeah. So any of our friends and colleagues across many of the countries in the world will also find that the discussion, the exchange of ideas, the sharing of how to manage the kind of challenges we all face in a book, they will find it most interesting and most educational for them. Hopefully, it will contribute to what I call this concept of humanity matters. Yeah, it brings together all these experts, all these young people, old people, and looking for something that they can feel satisfied, imparting to others, and hoping that their respective ideas will find traction and be taken up by their respective organization or from within their own countries. I mentioned just now about the activism of the youth in their discussion. They pronounce that they like to be advocates, they like to be broadcaster, they like to be builder of capacity. Yeah, the energy was very, very noticeable. I hope that this indeed will be what they will do going forward. Now, somebody asked me the other day, why am I so hooked up with this thing about managing diversity? What else can we do? No other country, I dare say, can pronounce that they don't have diversity. Whether it is about faith or religion, whether it is about culture, whether it is about, whatever each of us do, there will be diversity. And if we do not know how to manage this diversity and how to, enrich our own existence with coexistence with others, then I think we are all going to be in trouble. So bottom line is diversity is not a barrier to social cohesion. Yeah. The challenge is how people manage these differences. And what Vinita has said about her special project really give me a lot of hope, because yes, at the end of the day, we have to learn how to coexist, how to be creative in fostering understanding and working together. Paul Hedges, in his other writing in RSIS, always emphasized 4 things. 1, dialogue. So must have a lot of engagement, conversation. 2, he talks about narratives all the time. Before I come to RSIS 5 years ago, I never wonder about narratives. Narrative, I just take what's the main story in the main media and I just go along with it. But now, being here, listening to my colleagues like Paul Hedges, and also just listening to Vinita Sinha, we really have to think about what we say and how we express it, and how do we bring other people into the conversation. Paul is also very focused on leadership. It is very important. Humanity matters, but leadership matters even more. Everyone in the world look for some form of leadership, either at home. In my home, it's my wife who leads all the time. I have to accept that. But it's a joy to be happily following my wife doing everything. Then outside the home, in your immediate neighborhood, in your community, in your society, in your country, in your region, and on the global level, now we have this terrible situation from this novel coronavirus, and everybody look at each other, not sure what they can do together. But by doing whatever they think they should do by themselves, I think it is not going to bring us anywhere, because a virus does not respect nationality. It doesn't know what is the meaning of a boundary or a border. So good luck to those who believe that they are the greatest and they have the best in the world, because this is not going to be viable. Yeah. So in the last area that Paul talks about, you look at him, he's a young man compared to my white hair. Every time I listen to him, he talks about youthfulness. And I sometimes wonder whether he's signaling to me that I should actually take a step sideward or backward or whatever. But it is important, because if the young people do not carry on this ongoing process, this ever-going work in progress, I think we are in trouble. So this book, we have a section on youth activism, but for the reader who see this book, you will be puzzled, because the section on youth activism, youth role in the ICCS, are only 4 or 5 pages of colorful graphic recording. Why? Because the new way of doing things is not to write long essays. The young people just have an artist in the room, take down the key points, make it into a graphic, colorful portrayal of what we say. And then when I ask for a summary record, they say, sir, this is it. It's a big piece of paper with all the wonderful coloring, yeah. And this is a record of the proceeding. No wonder they call it the unconference session of the ICCS. Unconference. It's not a conference. It is an unconventional way of recording what transpired in all these group sharing among the young people. So the youth of today, yeah, or anybody who is young at heart, hopefully like me, will be looking at all these dimensions which the young people are putting across, and say, okay, maybe this is the way we should go ahead, instead of following the old fuddy-duddy way and say that, no, we have to write a piece of paper, 3,000 words or 5,000 words. I do not know whether one day RSIS can be a school of international studies by our students or our professor just producing all these graphic recording of a conference they attend. Now I insist that when they come back, they have to tell me what happened at the conference. And they write me sometime 10 pages of the proceedings transpired at the conference. In the future, I won't be surprised if one of the young researchers will come back with just one drawing of what he captured of the proceedings in the conference. So that's the way to go. But really going ahead, this book is a very rich collection of what transpired at the ICCS. And let me stress again, it has nothing to do with Singapore. The presence of King Abdullah and many other dignitaries from foreign countries in this conference is not just for show. It is also a reflection of their belief. This conference talk about things that bothers them, things that they need to do. So have a look at the book, and then you will see for yourself how useful this collection is all about. Okay, I think I should stop here. We should not run over time. I just want to close by thanking everyone from the RSIS team, all our guests here today, and all of you who are listening out there, whether on Zoom or on Facebook or whatever platform they are on. Thank you for making the effort to join us today. Yeah, we hope that you can see from reading the book or by going into the RSIS website and other websites like World Scientific Publishing, you will get an idea of what we are doing. It is a very important initiative. We hope that we can do this periodically over the next few years. Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for this time you've given to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Ong. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the RSIS-WSPC virtual book launch. We are pleased to announce that the book is on sale at a limited time special discount of 30% off. Details of the discount will be shown on screen right after this. And on behalf of RSIS and World Scientific Publishing, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and have a pleasant evening. Thank you.